Hello and welcome to Digitech. Today we're going to do another loops project. This one is just counting. So this project should hopefully show really clearly exactly what the loop is doing, what changes about the loop every time it goes around, and another way of using a loop, because they're very, very common, very useful to get your head around how they work and how they can save a huge amount of copy paste, and they can be a bit more flexible than copy paste as well. So here we're just going to write the bare bones HTML again. It's always very, very similar. So just trying to get the head section ready for our scripts and the body section ready for the interface to our JavaScript program. We've got a heading for counting, and we're going to test out the live server stuff, including live reload. Now, in this project, we're using a while loop, which is similar to the other project we did, LO, and we're going to be using a counting variable again as well. The while loop is quite useful because it is not as specific as some other kinds of loops. It'll just continue going and going and going until while the condition in the brackets is true. So it's a bit like an if statement. So if the thing in the brackets is true, the code in the brackets will run as a block. The only thing with while loops is you need to be a little bit careful that you do change something every loop. It's quite easy to get stuck in an infinite loop. So it's pretty common as well. And when you're testing, you'll often have to close a tab or kill the browser to try and get the loop to stop. Here we are setting up the project. We've got a label. So we're going to get the input from the user of what they want to count to, so that our loop is a bit more responsive to what they want to do. The loop is not hard-coded anymore in the JavaScript. Last time with the LO, we had a specific number in the variable that the loop ran. But this one we're going to get the number from the user. So it's just a bit more usable. So we've got our usual label and button pair. And then, as usual, we have a paragraph output. So just clicking around. I think in this one, I tried to type in letters, but because we've got type equals number, you can't type in any letters, which is a nice way of doing data validation. It means that in the JavaScript, you don't have to make sure that the user has put in numbers, because the browser will only let them put in numbers. In some other forms of coding, you need to check that their data is exactly what you expected. But here we're using the power of HTML to our advantage to make it a lot easier. Now just connecting the script up. And obviously the button really doesn't do anything at the moment, but at the top of that script is a console log, so we should be able to see that, and there it is there. Alright, now that we've got everything connected and we've got the interface and the HTML, we can start coding up the actual JavaScript. As with most of our programs, there's a button click that's going to kick off this code, and we'll just set up all our brackets so that inside this chunk of code inside this brackets is what's going to run when you click the button. We'll set up some input variables. This is very similar to a lot of other projects that we've done in terms of connecting to the web page to get the input from the user that they've typed into some input field. And just there, you'll notice I forgot what the input field was actually called, what the ID tag was, so I had to go back to the page and copy and paste it. No shame in a bit of copy and paste when you're coding. And the next line down there on line 5, we're just converting the number into a number. So when you get stuff from the web page, it starts as a word, and you can't really do maths and stuff with words, so you need to convert it to a number. Now we're just setting up the structure for our while loop. So we've got while and then some regular brackets where we'll put the condition, and then curly brackets, which will enclose the code that will run every loop. Our condition this time is while I is less than or equal to max. So it's starting at 0 and it's going to go all the way until the number that the user has typed in. And what's going to happen every loop is that we're going to update the result variable we're going to add a space and whatever I is at the moment. And then we're going to add one to I, because if we forget that, we'll get stuck in an infinite loop. At the bottom, last thing to do is just output the result to the page. I use result really, really frequently in these, but you can call it anything you want. You could call it like answer or output or something like that. It should just be descriptive. So here we can see I can type in the number 10 and we get all the numbers from 0 to 10. And we should be able to change, say whatever we want and count to that. So obviously it doesn't do negative numbers because it starts at 0 and it adds one every loop. So it doesn't really get past the first loop at all. So when it's negative, so max would be -1, and your first thing that the while loop would check is while I is less than max. And in this case, it would be while I is less than -1, which it's not, so it wouldn't even start. And if we want to see what's happening in the background, we can send a little developer message using the console log. And sometimes it's really useful to output what variables are at certain points in the code, and console log is an easy way to do that. So you can see every time the loop goes around, it's doing a console log to tell us what I currently is. And we'll just tidy up some of these things. We don't need the console log anymore. When you're submitting code, you can leave the console logs in if you want. It's a little bit untidy, but it's not too bad. Next, we're going to just make this code a little bit smaller and a little bit easier to read. So whenever you have a situation where it's like the variable name equals variable plus something, you can replace that with just plus equals. It's just because it's so frequent that you need to do it, JavaScript allows you to write it in a simpler way, just to save you some time. JavaScript is written in a way that's trying to be as easy as possible. It does have to still be computer readable, so it can't just be English, but it can be as close as possible. Like any good coder, we now need to put in our comments, and we're going to explain how we got the inputs and converted them, and a little bit about our loop. So we're starting at 0. You could start at 1 if you want. I think maybe I chose 0 because 0 is where we start encoding a lot, but you don't have to start at 0. You can start at 1 if you feel like it'd be a bit more of a normal user experience. And then explaining what our loop does. So rather than, I am going to explain every line. Okay. So the loop is going to run until I is the same as max, as long as it's less than. And every time it loops around, it's going to add a space and the number I, whatever that is, to the result, and increase I by 1 so that we don't get stuck in an infinite loop, and output the result to the page. And that will do us for the counting program.